Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the DMZ. Bill, I saw you on Up with Steve Kornacki, and
Thank you.
I do have a gotcha question for you.
Okay.
What is Tiger Lily Salon?
So, normally,
And are you being paid by them to advertise?
they're not paying me. I'm paying them. Believe me, I'm paying them plenty. But I normally get my hair cut, by a barber down the street, and my wife goes to a fancier salon, every so often, and she has a good relationship with the owner there. She's been trying to. So my wife wanted me to go there, and when the owner found out that I go on TV from time to time, she wanted to get me in the chair. So I sat down for the full blown metrosexual treatment, scalp massage and all.
Nice.
And I said that I would ask Gina Louise to plug. Hey, my husband was on MSNBC. Look at the good work Tiger Lily Salon did afterwards. So,
well, you looked good.
That was just
the beard looked good. The hair looked good. And look, I'm a fan.
You.
I'm not busting your chops here. I'm a fan of the manscaping. I feel like many of us could use a brow waxing from time to time. And if you're gonna go on TV, you gotta look good.
I don't care for the scalp massage though. I mean, I didn't want to make a thing about it when I was there, but I'm just kind of like, you're just extending the socially awkward time of this process. We know this isn't helping anybody do anything.
Oh no, I completely disagree.
Let's just get down to business.
I like the scalp massage. I like the shampoo. Have you ever gotten the shampoo?
Yeah, I got the shampoo.
I like the shampoo. Anyway, so check them out. Let's plug them again, Bill. What is Tiger Lily Salon in Northampton, Massachusetts? You look good.
That's right.
Go there, check it out. But anyway, kudos to you. Another good appearance on Up with Steve, and I did watch.
Thank you.
I did watch. So good stuff.
Now, did you do MSNBC later that same day?
I did. I did MSNBC at 12:30 that afternoon from DC, and had a good little hit. I don't know how many people watch MSNBC at 12:30 on a Sunday afternoon, but to those of you who did, it was fun, good conversation, and I guess it's just proof that the blogging heads DMZ world is getting exposure. And Bill, I do have a little story to tell you about that. So I think it was Saturday, and let me plug a little establishment that I frequent. It's called Taquero Poblano in Delray near Alexandria, Virginia. I'm in Taquero Poblano with the wife and the kids, and there's a family, like a husband, a very attractive wife, very cute little baby, and the husband comes over to me, and he's a big fan. Doesn't know me from Morning Joe, doesn't know me from the Daily Caller. He's a fan of the DMZ.
Wow.
So I'm spotted essentially out amongst the folks, and it's because of this here show. So word is getting out. Tell your friends. But, that's a kudos to both of us, I would say, Bill.
Now, in true DMZ fashion, when I feel like I have sympathy pains when things upset you. I hope you are the same for me, that we have this psychic bond. I saw in the New York Times yesterday that they went to town on Marco Rubio's personal finances, and I know we're conservatives.
Wait a second.
In general.
Why is I feel like there is a narrative developing that I'm a Rubio fan, that I'm a Rubio fanboy, and I'm picking up on this. Every time I do, I do Julie Mason's XM POTUS radio show, and she implies that quite often. It's something I did or said.
I do not want to cast any aspersions to your journalistic integrity, but it's not just about you. I mean, I feel like conservatives in general went ballistic at the New York Times. I mean, and Rubio himself, fundraised off it, so they raised $100,000 off the New York Times story. I mean, I think it's fair to say you believe Rubio does a lot of things right. That does a lot of things to make the Republican Party more modern, and I would assume you would be displeased for him to get unfair treatment.
Well, I say bring it on, because he's just going to hit it out of the ballpark, Bill. I think this is boomeranged on the lamestream media, and my boy Marco came out pretty good. So I say bring it on. No, look, in all seriousness, Bill, I think that there are a couple of factors at play here. I mean, number one, I think all of these guys deserve vetting and scrutiny. And there have been rumors about Rubio's finances going back 4 years.
This came up in the 2010 Senate race.
Yeah, absolutely. And there have been questions about him using or commingling fund the Republican Party of Florida's credit card with his own expenses and then reimbursing them later. I don't think it's anything untoward, but I do think it raises questions and it opens the door to questions. And I think if you read that New York Times piece, a lot of it was, just sort of a rehash and totally fair, legitimate, not scandalous, but, they're looking into this guy. He's running for president. It's fair game. I think that they played up the boat part of it, and I think that was a mistake. It's sort of what you have to do to sell a story, and I think that was a mistake, making this Rubio. Here's how I see it. He's a guy who's very much like a regular guy compared to most political elites, and did not come from money, and like a lot of us have had some struggles with adapting to, sort of getting by and adjusting to maybe having a little money, and I mean, I think it's a very maybe living above your means a little bit. God knows. I've been guilty of that. I mean, I think it's a very common experience that people can identify with. Look, he finally made some money. He got a book advance for, I think it was $800,000. And as sort of a reward, he splurged and he spent 10% of that on a boat, on a motorboat. And I think it cost $80,000. And that's a lot of money. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that's like twice as much money as my dad made in a year, a lot of years. But it's, if you look at the boat, the notion that it, as I think the Times characterized it as like a luxury boat, that really didn't ring true, and I think it opened them to mockery, and I think that that it was sort of easy to mock them. We also have this new media environment whereby if one mainstream media outlet gets a scoop or gets a story, then the many other outlets are sort of more than happy to help mock them and debunk the story. And I think we saw that with Politico, helping Team Rubio and the conservatives knock down this story and make fun of it.
I mean, but I feel like I'm hearing, I think it's a little contradictory to say this is evidence of how he's a regular guy and deal with everyday middle-class struggles, but he got an $800,000 windfall, which is not an everyday middle-class struggle. And I mean, there's the boat issue, and then he had 3 properties at one point. I think he sold one of them recently. Now, I'm not arguing this should be considered fatal to someone being president. If someone doesn't handle their money well, doesn't mean that. I mean, people can draw the sort of a cheap parallel. Well, if you can't manage your own money, how can you manage a budget? Well, the two things really are not actually comparable. But I find it sort of off-putting to say, well, this is proof he's a regular guy, because this is not a regular guy problem.
Well, I would push back on that a little bit. I mean, I see what you're saying, but most politicians at this level are really rich. I mean, even the sort of regular guys.
Oh, he's definitely not a multimillionaire.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
I mean, look at John Kerry. Look at look at Jeb Bush, just to name 2. I mean, even Rand Paul's the son of a congressman and an ophthalmologist. I mean, So, and his dad was a doctor as well. So, I mean, I think Rubio's experience coming the son of immigrants who didn't come from money, and you start making a little money, but you don't know how to manage it. You don't, I mean, I think I've talked about on this podcast, on this show before, but I think I've talked about how I like had to learn how to network. I had to read a book called Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty by a guy named Harvey Mackay, because the notion of like networking sounds so like sleazy, but like of just the stuff that the normal stuff that people who come from money and from a more cultured background, sophisticated background, just sort of naturally do. It was a totally foreign concept to me. So I think that it makes sense that there would be some struggles on the way. And as Rubio, as his career advanced and he made more money, all of a sudden now there's more, you know, there's you know, more taxes and there's more, in a way, more challenges. That if you just sort of have a regular job paying you $40,000 a year, and you just sort of are a 9 to 5er, in a way, there's less temptation maybe. I know Rubio is attempting to go into a different bracket to transcend kind of where his parents were, and I would just argue that it sounds like a happy dilemma, but I think there's some problems that sort of arise when you're not prepared necessarily. And again, I think you're right. I don't think this has anything to do with how he would manage the budget. I think this is as a personal thing. And I think a lot of Americans, frankly, can identify with it. You know, the fact that he's had to struggle a little bit, the fact that he got into some debt, it's like, go ahead and make that an issue. I think it probably helps him.
I would just think that if I was a Republican, you should want your guys to all be vetted. You don't want surprises if they're the nominee. You know, Democrats feel like they kind of dodged a bullet by not nominating John Edwards because no one caught his affair and his and how he got impregnated his mistress until after he dropped out. I would just wonder if you're in the early. I mean, look, Denny Hastert kept this secret for his entire career. I mean, you never know what might come up, no matter how good the vetting job is. And you know, I think it was Dan Pfeiffer, as a former White House spokesperson, said on Twitter, you know, Republicans don't get the irony of them complaining that Obama was never properly vetted, and yet they're attacking the New York Times for doing a modicum of vetting.
Well, no, but I think you're right, Bill. And as I said at the beginning, I think this is a pretty legitimate story. I think that the luxury speedboat, as they described it, was the problem. I mean, I think that really opened it up to attack. And I think it probably has partly to do with the way that they thought they had to sell the story, the way they thought that they had to promote the story to get buzz and to, you know, I'd have to go back and check how the story sort of broke. I mean, it was immediately cast as a hit job by, you know, by Team Rubio and by conservatives. And by the way, let me also say this. I think this also really helps Rubio. You know, I mean, I know this is conventional wisdom by now, and it's not like a unique observation, but Rubio was really in trouble with conservatives. And the more that, like, the New York Times can attack him, and by the way, this comes on the heels of the other, you know, putting this in context, the other kind of ridiculous story, I think it was also the Times that talked about Rubio and his wife having gotten 17 tickets, or violate, you know,
speeding tickets,
motor violations in the past 20 years or something. But only 4 of them were from Marco Rubio. And so I think that's part of the context here too, that this was really the second example of something that they really kind of made a big deal out of that probably wasn't that big of a deal. I think it was kind of how they played it. So, and I think,
we've seen this dynamic where if the media is going after Republican conservatives, then defend you if they have misgivings about your policy positions because they just like the fight with the liberal media.
Yeah.
But I mean, is there anybody saying, you know, maybe there's something in this story that is definitively damning, but would it make you pause? Would it make you say, that is a little funny. That is a little odd that he does have his personal finances. He has had these issues with using Republican Party money for personal uses, though he paid it back after after it was found out. Would it just make you worry that there's something else? There's more shoes to drop as this goes along. That this should not be treated as the final vetting. That they're going to stay on the story, and who knows what might come out later.
Well, there have been rumors about Rubio going back years. Nothing's come out, really. I mean, there have been attempts there have been gotcha attempts, and they've sort of gone nowhere. I think, there's this code word, there's this dog whistle, and it's called Miami. And when people say, in Florida, when people say Miami, that implies sort of, I don't think it's a racial thing, but it's more like people who play fast and loose, that there's a sort of little Havana kind of corruption down there. Maybe even the speeding tickets have something to do with it. I don't know. But that has haunted Rubio. I mean, the quote unquote Miami thing, which some people see as a dog whistle, has haunted Rubio, and there have been people whispering that there's a shoe to drop, that something's going to come out. He's friends with David Rivera. And they owned a house together, and David Rivera was this, Florida congressman who I think had to resign, if I'm not mistaken, over some ethical breaches. So, look, I mean, here's the deal. I think Rubio is an incredibly talented and charismatic political figure, and he very well could be the nominee, and we could do a hell of a lot worse. But if there is something that's going to come out, you want it to come out now. Let's find out. None of us are beyond. I mean, he without sin can cast the first stone. Like, we've all made mistakes. But if there's something that is disqualifying that we don't know about, I think we would all be better off to find out sooner rather than later.
I mean, I feel like in the Democratic race in 2008, there was a lot of stuff with Obama and his ties to Tony Rezko. And, the way you talk about Miami being a whistle, Chicago is being made a bit of a dog whistle. In fact, Chicago still is a dog whistle when it comes to Obama.
No, you were told that if you said Chicago, that was a racial, that was racist or something, right? I mean, somebody alleged that.
Right. So, I feel like there were Democrats back then that sort of had the attitude, let's see how you handle this, Obama. I want some proof that you can deal with these sorts of charges. We don't remember Tony Rezko as much. We remember more how he handled Jeremiah Wright. That was sort of the grand pushback, the race relations speech he gave after that. That was sort of the definitive, okay, guy, we know you can handle this stuff because that just blew my mind. I would just think maybe Republicans would want to sit back and say, let's see how you deal with this. Let's see how good you are at handling these kinds of pieces, and not just and not do the job for him, because maybe you might be getting ahead of things.
Well, look, it's funny you bring up Rezko, because I as conservatives have pushed back on the Rubio story. I've seen, there's always well, they did it too type, aspect to political argumentation. And I saw somebody on Twitter make the point that, well, you'll forgive Rubio for, he didn't have the benefit of having Tony Rezko help him, loan him the money to buy his house or whatever. So, it hasn't gone unnoticed that there are some potentially, double standards maybe regarding the way that Rubio is being vetted compared to the way Obama kind of wasn't by the mainstream media. But
that was vetting. I mean, that was very well reported and addressed.
I don't remember where that story came from, though. My guess is it came from.
I mean, Chicago Tribune was all over that.
Is that okay?
I mean, they were merciless.
Okay. Well, anyway, so that's sort of where we're at on it. I think that maybe there's a shoe to drop, but until then, go ahead and throw him in the briar patch is what I'm saying, because I think that this is helping him in a variety of ways. It's helping conservatives coalesce around him, um, and I think it's also demonstrating that he's pretty adept at punching back and at not being a victim by the media, but that not, you know, you could also even argue that going through the very difficult time that Team Rubio went through over the immigration debate prepared them for the slings and arrows that they're going to face in a campaign, and that's important. And so maybe they're just maybe they've learned a couple lessons along the way.
Now, I've also seen folks on the right say, that the Times is out to get Rubio. Therefore, this proves that Rubio is the one that the left fears the most. That they've sicked the New York Times to take him down. But the New York Times, went into partnership with the author of Clinton Cash to do reporting based on what came up in his book. And they've also done an article on Jeb Bush's business dealings. They did an article on Mike Huckabee's weird dietary supplement endorsements. It seems like they're methodically going through all of the candidates and looking into all of their various business dealings. So I find it implausible this is some sort of unique treatment that Rubio was getting. If you think the story is sort of weak sauce, then maybe it's because they did their due diligence on it, and that's what they came up with and ran a story on it.
No, I completely agree. Look, there very well may come a time when the left views Rubio as an existential threat, and they try to take him down like Palin. And I think he'll be more resilient than she turned out to be. But it's understandable why they may view him as a serious long-term threat for a variety of reasons. But I don't think we're to that point yet. And I think that it makes perfect sense for a media outlet of record to go through all the candidates and to do some vetting. And like I said before, I feel like the way that they sold the story, or at least the way it was portrayed, talking about the luxury boat, I think that was sort of the slip up. Maybe that was just exploited by by Team Rubio, but whatever. I think that the story in general was fine, but I think that they made a couple of mistakes that opened them up to mockery and criticism. And let's see. I mean, if this is like, again, I think it comes on the heels of the other kind of ridiculous story about Rubio's speeding tickets or whatever, where it was sort of unfair. He's gotten 4 tickets in like 2 decades. I mean, that's a pretty damn good record if you ask me. But they combined him and his wife to sort of inflate the numbers. So let's see. If they sort of give it a break and move on to somebody else, then I'll be inclined to think that, well, they were just kind of doing their job. If there's a story tomorrow about something else about Rubio that seems kind of manufactured and perfunctory, then I may have second thoughts about this.
Now, as you know, I'm now on the record as predicting Jeb Bush being the nominee, so I'm gonna carry that around my neck, I think, for the next 8 months or so. So when the story came out this week that there was a campaign shakeup in the Jeb Bush camp, one of my old friends who's now a reporter, CC'd me on Twitter to say, look, everything's falling apart. Why are you so insane that you would predict this so soon? But I find this an odd. To call it a shakeup seems very histrionic. I mean, John McCain, fired a whole bunch of staffers, top aides in July of 2007. And that was the nadir of his campaign, and he still got the nomination. I think you wrote a piece about this where you point out, John Kerry fired one of his guys before Iowa.
Well, he
still got
fired
the nomination.
John Kerry fired his campaign manager in November of 2003. And went on to win the Iowa caucuses in January.
Right. So it's not like you can never make changes in your. I mean, and those are bigger. I mean, Jeb didn't fire anybody. He just moved people around. So why should that be treated as some sort of evidence of panic in the Jeb Bush camp? I find odd.
Well, I do think that this is like, it's like when you fire somebody and you move them to being a consultant. I mean, I do think that, look, David Kochel, who is an Iowa expert and I guess had been a Romney guy, was hired and presumed to be Jeb Bush's campaign manager. And now a guy named Danny Diaz, who is, I kind of know both these guys. Danny, allegedly, legend has it, he sleeps with a BlackBerry on his chest and responds, like, he'll send you an email at like 1 a.m. And you'll get up at 5 or 6 a.m. and respond, and he'll respond like within 2 minutes of you sending back that. I mean, and has been doing this for 15 years or however long that he's been a Republican operative. He's actually partnered in a firm with the same firm as Terry Nelson, who was one of the John McCain campaign managers who was relieved, or one of the, I guess he was the initial McCain campaign manager. So anyway, politics is an incestuous business, of course. But no, I don't want to say this wasn't a big deal. I do think that clearly this was a shakeup. But my point is, maybe that's a good thing. You shouldn't see it as a sign of chaos or panic. It's maybe a sign of somebody like that's going to adopt to changing circumstances, and maybe you need to shake things up. But John McCain shook things up and he won. John Kerry shook things up and he won. Like, I think that the press wants to write the chaos story. Things are falling apart. And I think the candidates are afraid that it's going to be perceived as a chaos story. And I see it as, well, maybe they're just getting the ship in order, and changing things change, circumstances change, you juggle things around. Maybe that's a smart move.
I mean, it also would make some sense, man. I don't know exactly what the logic was behind it, but if you had as your top guy an Iowa expert, but Iowa maybe is not looming that large in your emerging campaign strategy, maybe it doesn't make sense to have an Iowa expert as the top dog. I mean, Walker has a bit of an edge in Iowa right now. Iowa, in recent years, has not picked the final nominee because the social conservative right has dominated, and they picked Huckabee and Santorum. And Jeb might say, "Look, I don't need Iowa to catapult myself in this race. New Hampshire, South Carolina, Florida will be Nevada will be sufficient." So maybe I need a different perspective, and not someone who gives me on the ground Iowa intel.
Well, people also, I think, underestimate or forget. We tend to forget the impact that the hiring of Kochel had on getting Romney out of the race. So this is a Romney guy, and Jeb hires him, and it's a surprise to everybody. And I think I'm like 90% sure I'm pronouncing this last name right, Kochel. But David Kochel, I mean, he gets hired by Jeb, and I think it's within a couple days that Romney announces he's not running for president. Maybe it's coincidental, but it struck a lot of people as maybe the straw that broke the camel's back, that Jeb had essentially outmaneuvered Mitt, and that this was sort of...
Well, maybe he did his job. He kept Romney out. He didn't really need to do anything else.
Yeah, mission accomplished. There's other weird stuff happening too, which is that, like, Kochel moved to Miami, even though he was the Iowa expert. Moved to Miami. The Jeb campaign is apparently being run out of Miami. The Super PAC, which is, I guess, headed by Mike Murphy, is run out of L.A. So there's some interesting stuff happening, in terms of logistics and infrastructure with Team Jeb. I'll just tell you this also. My sources indicate that it is not a joyful campaign. That and if you know the operatives that are working for Jeb, this makes sense. These are very these are guys, including Danny Diaz, who's going to be the new campaign manager. These are guys who are persnickety, detail-oriented. They make the trains run on time. And, Jeb wanted to run this quote-unquote joyful campaign. Well, maybe he'll be having fun. But I'm hearing that everybody has to move to Miami, which ought to be a hell of a fun place to be, but that it's like, it is it's like signing out to go to lunch kind of an opera. It is a very, sort of managed and micromanaged operation, which, maybe that's what you need to be on a presidential campaign. And this is why I chose, as one of the many reasons I chose not to be a political operative, Bill, when, there was a time when I thought that's what I was going to do. But what I do is like a hell of a lot more fun than that.
Yeah, I would imagine the Rand Paul or Ted Cruz campaigns would be much more fun to work on. But, I remember images of the Obama 2008 operation where it's just reporters would come to the HQ in Chicago and you just see a bunch of people sitting at computer terminals in a very quiet, placid room. This is serious business, and there's a lot of little things that have to get done right. And if you're going to take out Jeb, and this was my point in the piece I wrote the other day, who's going to be exceptionally well financed, maybe not the greatest candidate, maybe has a Bush albatross to overcome, but anyone's going to overtake someone with that much institutional support is got to do a lot of things really right.
Yeah.
And if you're too loosey-goosey, I don't see how that's gonna happen.
I mean, I'm guessing the Rand world is a little less organized like that. But Cruz, Cruz is basically making everybody move to Houston or Austin or wherever he is. I think it's Houston. And also worth noting, the people who got Cruz elected, not with Cruz now. And just yesterday, my friend and former colleague, Amanda Carpenter, whom I worked with, worked alongside her at Human Events and then worked with her at
former blogging head. Yeah, we went a couple rounds in the past.
Yeah, she and I worked together at townhall.com. Did she fill in for me here, or how did that work?
I don't remember if she was subbing or if this was before you came on formally. I have to go back into the archives.
So anyway, Amanda Carpenter, who I guess was a speechwriter for Dement, and then when he retired, she moved over to Cruz, is leaving Cruz, and I think going back into journalism. Take that for what it's worth. It's an interesting time to move on. I applaud her for making the move. I think journalism's more fun than politics. Although speech writing's kind of cool too, right? I mean, it's different than the campaign world. I mean, I feel like if I had to do politics, speech writing would be maybe the way to go. But anyway, I don't know how I got on that, but
well, I want to ask you one more 2016 question. So this Saturday, Hillary does her kickoff rally. Monday is supposedly the Jeb announcement, and Tuesday is the Trump announcement, and he says he's going to New Hampshire the day after. So the presumption being that he would actually announce it. He's not teasing us this time. So after we've had sort of a week off of announcements, we had a bit of a respite. This is going to kick back up again. Do you think that does Trump step on Jeb here, or will the media treat Trump as a non-serious candidate and give Jeb, the full week and the full momentum boost of his formal announcement?
That's a really good question. The media world is changing so dramatically that even I can't keep up with it and speculate. I mean, in a rational world, Jeb gets much more attention, but we don't live in a rational world. and the rules are changing. And I think it depends what Trump says, and obviously he has a penchant for being quotable and controversial. I mean, I think the Jeb, it's much more significant, newsworthy that Jeb gets in, but I mean, Trump's a master showman, right? So I don't even know the answer to that, though. What's your take?
My gut is that Trump steps all over Jeb. Not that I think it's fatal to Jeb or anything, but I think there is a real problem for the Republican Party here in that Trump will get a lot of media attention. He knows how to get media attention. He will likely clear the polling threshold for the initial debates, and he seems like so far he's been very eager to call out other Republicans. And in his trademark, I'm the most awesome guy in the world, and all these guys are punks. He seems to revel in whatever weakness arises in a Republican candidate, hammering him on it, at minimum on his Twitter feed, sometimes in press statements. So he's not going. Other Republicans, there's always a bit of a tension between wanting to one up your primary opponents, but not wanting to fatally undermine them because you might be supporting this guy down the road. And Trump seems to have no hesitancy. He has had, as not being a party guy for his life, he's got nothing invested in any of these other candidates to make them look good or to hold back on them. So I think that
you don't hate Trump for being Trump. This is what Trump does. What bugs me is that we take the bait, that we, not you and me, Bill, but that collectively we promote him, that we give him attention, that we egg him on. I mean, I was against it years ago when he spoke at CPAC. This must have been 2000. Geez, when would this have been? I mean, this is many years ago. This is before the birther stuff. Well, it might have been during the birther stuff, but it was before he flirted with running for president the last time. And CPAC had him speak, and I thought it was a bad idea then. And we, conservatives give him oxygen, and the media gives him oxygen, and it just don't take the bait, folks. It's the same reason I'm not gonna get into a fight with a certain author of Adios America. Don't take the bait because they want to get
the name of the game. The name of the game in a presidential race is to get that oxygen. I mean, the burden is on the candidate to figure out how to get the media to pay attention to them. If you're Rick Santorum and you have an event and one person shows up, you're not doing your job as a candidate to get the kind of press attention that you want. And so maybe, the fact that Trump is a showman gives him an unfair advantage over a schlumpy candidate, but schlumpy candidates don't win races very often. He forces you to step up your game.
This is
so you can get.
Oh, by the way, this is why I'm writing my book. Go pre-order it. It's called Too Dumb to Fail, and this is the bullshit that I rail against in my book. And if you agree with me, pre-order it today. Number 2.
Look. Let's go into Rubio. Rubio, I think of all the candidates.
Yes.
Rubio has done the most spade work to come up with actual policies to govern on, where he's not just doing cheap anti-Obama sound bites. He actually has policy ideas. I don't think they're good ideas. I think a lot of them are very thin and wouldn't make much of a difference, but they're actual ideas, and it's more than anyone else has done.
Which is why he fares quite well in Too Dumb to Fail.
In the Roast and Ride event this past Saturday, they all got 8-minute speeches, and Rubio did wedge in, his broader economic critique of where things are after 6 years of Obama, and he didn't. It wasn't a super wonky speech, but he did tease some of the things that he would do in response. There was not a single headline about Rubio's policy ideas coming out of Roast and Ride. It was all about Scott Walker riding a motorcycle. So, that's not fair.
Yeah.
But the onus is on Rubio to figure out how to get the media to write about his stuff, and
But this
Trump
is
makes your job harder. But you got to figure that out if you want to win.
no, I agree with you. The onus is on him. But let me just step back, having conceded that, and lament the state of the media. And we do live in a world where there are perverse incentives. And the perverse incentives are to do symbolism over substance and to, I mean, it's bad for conservatism that saying, look, riding a motorcycle is one thing. I mean, that's fairly harmless. But the saying of crazy stuff or controversial stuff to get publicity is indicative of this sort of Kardashian world we live in, where it used to be that any publicity wasn't good publicity, that you needed, that good publicity was good publicity. We live in a world now where you can become famous from making a sex tape, right? I mean, Kim Kardashian, that was great for not only her career, but for an entire family's career. I mean, we wouldn't, let's be honest. I mean, Bruce Jenner was the greatest athlete of his generation, but the Caitlyn Jenner story would not be nearly as big of a story had Kim Kardashian not done a sex tape and had Kris Jenner not known how to exploit her family. This is the world we live in, and it has transcended Hollywood, and it is alive and well in politics. And this is what we're seeing, and I think it's a horrible development. Now, what you have to do is find a way to sort of preserve your intellectual integrity, but simultaneously be a little bit of a showman and a little bit of a marketer, and you have to do that or you're done. But it's unfortunate the direction that our country is headed.
Now, we were talking before the show. You were so you're already talking about your dismay with the state of our media. You seemed a little verklempt over this profile in the Washington Post of Benny Johnson, who got drummed out of BuzzFeed for plagiarism and is now having a resurgence for a new site that he founded. I forget the name of it.
Well, I don't think he found
it. And now
is
getting feted, in the Washington Post as a leader of web journalism, even though we never really, in the old days, if you were found as a plagiarist, that was it. You never got hired ever again, and now you can make a comeback in a fairly short span of time.
Well, it is interesting. I mean, I think, why did we drum Stephen Glass out of journalism? Like, wouldn't Stephen Glass today have maybe taken 2 weeks off, maybe gone on a boat somewhere, and then come back, be hired by National Review or one of the many, many outlets that now exist, and be seen as a colorful person? Like, plagiarizing would have made Stephen Glass more colorful. And to me, the only way you're in trouble is if you are personally shamed and you go into hiding, then you're in trouble. But if you sort of have the Obama attitude that nothing's it's not that big of a deal, if you have that attitude and you just get a job at one of the many, many media outlets, new media outlets that are now available, I feel like you can reinvent yourself. Sort of like the Kardashian sex tape. Actually, it makes you a more interesting, more colorful person. There's no shame. And you just bounce back, and then people write profiles about you. So,
I do think the Stephen Glass case is different than Benny Johnson. Stephen Glass was not just a plagiarist; he was a fabricator, and that's a bigger sin to overcome. Maybe you're still right that he would.
But if you read this Washington Post story, there are multiple different stories about how Benny responded to his downfall. Like, did a bunch of friends take him out on a boat where he spent an entire week on a boat, and they took his cell phone and locked it in a safe? Or did he just hang out at a hotel and go crabbing once or twice, and his girlfriend put his smartphone in her pocketbook? I mean, there are differing stories about even that. So,
well, he maybe he's embellishing his own personal story, but what got him fired from BuzzFeed was not making up quotes and making up people in his articles. I think the difference here is that there is this entire trend in web journalism where there's this huge emphasis on clicks, where repackaging other people's content has become somewhat professionally acceptable. I mean, BuzzFeed does a lot of stuff where they find something on Reddit and they present it differently, and that becomes a traffic driver. Huffington Post does a lot of, the New York Times did this, I'm going to sum up their story. Maybe I'll throw in a link to them so you can say that I'm not stealing it. But why would you click that link? Because I gave you the gut of the story already.
Well, look,
so that's become sort of a business model.
I think clearly Benny is very talented and very good at what he does. And I think you're right. He sort of was on the cutting edge. That journalism has changed. I mean, we had the whole story. I'm trying to think of the guy's name. Is it Perlstein? The guy who wrote the books about Nixon and Reagan. Do you know who I'm talking about here?
Rick Perlstein.
Richard Perlstein. There was a big controversy. I think we might have talked about it, about how he didn't include footnotes or citations in his book, and Craig Shirley, the Reagan biographer, was arguing that that's unethical and wrong. And Perlstein said, well, no, we put them on the website, and this is there was a question is this the wave of the future? I mean, I think the world is changing. I think some of the old rules are changing, and you could even argue that in some ways it's better. Look, the other point too is my former colleague Kurt Bardella, who used to work for Darrell ISIS and got into trouble with, I guess, leaking stuff to was it Leibovich, and was sort of drummed out of the politics world, ended up coming here to the Daily Caller, and in a way I thought it was a good thing. What should you do? If you make a mistake, how much penance do you have to do? Shouldn't you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and try to go on with life? But on the other hand, I also feel like if you bounce back a little too quickly, are you learning the lessons? If you do something that was once seen as an egregious journalistic violation, I don't think you need to necessarily be cast out of, society indefinitely. But if a week later or a month later you bounce back and you're being celebrated as this colorful character, that does have a sort of, moral hazard, perverse incentive quality to it. So anyway, I think it raises interesting questions about the state of journalism.
Well, I'm going to leave it on that note because I got to jump to a meeting. But it's always good to talk to you. Now, you might be out of town next week. So we'll work out what our next week's schedule is. But if I don't see you next week, I'll see you in a couple weeks.
You got it, buddy. Check us out on Twitter at DMZ Show. Pre-order Too Dumb to Fail. Anything to plug, Bill?
I did do a piece about the aftermath of the USA Freedom Act, which was titled Snowden and Civil Libertarians Lost. I think we talked about that a little bit last week, but you can see my fuller thoughts over at Real Clear Politics. And if you head over to the MSNBC website, you can check out my turn on Steve Kornacki's Up from this past Sunday.
That is right. And then the last thing I'll plug is the podcast, Matt Lewis and the News. You get it on iTunes. I just had Mary Catherine Ham and Guy Benson on to talk about their book, End of Discussion, how the left's outrage industry shuts down debate, manipulates voters, and makes America less free and fun. Check that out. And
that's what I do here every week. I shut you down.
That's right. Catch you guys in a week or two. So stay tuned. Stay classy.
Till then.
See you, Bill.